man, it's good to be here. That icebreaker question was perfect for us, our family. Why? Because we're brand new to this city of Oakland. This is our new city. And the church is our new city. You see what I did there? Yeah? All right. Okay. We're awake. We're alive. We have had a lot of firsts the last month. We've only been in town for a month. We moved from Chicago. We're excited to be here. We're learning a lot. And the notable memory, this is sincere. I was the one that got to write the question, what did we talk about today? So I get to have the answer all prepared. The notable memory is the warm welcome we've received from this church already. We've already been in some of your homes. We've been out. We've had some coffee. We've had great conversations. We had a blast serving with you yesterday, so thanks for that welcome. It is remarkable, and it's made our move from Chicago that much better. So I know my family, I've seen them nodding too, so thank you for having us here. Despite Luis's comment about the pressure, no pressure comment, mostly you guys are warm and kind to us. So, hey, we're in a series, if you remember, we just started a new teaching series last week where we're looking at the miracles of Jesus, and we're trying to look at the miracles of Jesus the same way that he intended them to be looked at, right? We're asking not just what is the miracle, but we're saying what is the miracle about? What is God doing here? What does he want to show us about himself? And so do you remember, if you were here last week, or maybe you caught up on YouTube or on the podcast or something, you remember that we looked at Jesus' first miracle, turning water into wine. And we didn't just say, isn't that an amazing miracle? Pastor Gabe said, what is Jesus trying to show? He's saying something more than, I have the power to turn water into wine. He's telling us something about himself, right? He's saying he's the kind of person that gives a lot of wine at a wedding party, right? He's saying that he's the kind of person that takes shame and turns it to glory. It's amazing. And today we're going to look at another of these miracles, and we're going to ask the same question, what is God doing here? What is Jesus doing here through this miracle? What does he want us to see about himself? It's in John chapter 4, but before we get there, as I was reading and preparing, reading this passage that we're about to read together, I recalled this story that I read, this article that I read not just a few years ago, but like a few election cycles ago. Yeah, so I'm showing my age a little bit. Like a few election cycles ago, I read this article in a paper magazine back when we had those. And it was an interview with a political candidate. And in this interview, it was mostly a forgettable article. I remember almost nothing. I hardly remember the candidate. But I remember this one part. The candidate references being a person of faith. That's not so remarkable. We hear that kind of stuff, right? What was remarkable, what was interesting, and why I still remember it, was how the author, the writer of this article in this news weekly, responded. There's like a paragraph digression where the author goes, what about those of us who don't have faith? It was interesting. What about those of us who don't believe anything? Where's the candidate for us? That was the question. I loved the question. He didn't pander to the political candidate. He just asked the question about faith, right? Here, in the passage that we're going to look at, we have another question of faith, all right? So John chapter 4, verses 46 through 54. Let's read it. Once more this is Jesus, he visited Cana in Galilee where he had turned the water into wine. And there was a certain royal official whose son lay sick at Capernaum. When this man heard that Jesus had arrived in Galilee from Judea, he went to him and begged him to come and heal his son, who was close to death. Unless you people see signs and wonders, Jesus told him, you will never believe. The royal official said, Sir, come down before my child dies. Go, Jesus replied, your son will live. The man took Jesus at his word and departed. While he was still on the way, his servants met him with the news that his boy was living. And when he inquired as to the time when his son got better, they said to him, yesterday at 1 p.m, the fever left him. Then the father realized that this was the exact time at which Jesus had said to him, your son will live. So he and his whole household believed. This was the second sign Jesus performed after coming from Judea to Galilee. This is an amazing story for lots of reasons, and we're going to try to unpack it here over the next few minutes, right? Here, at this very last line we read, we recall, we remember why John's writing any of this stuff at all. We have this little tiny biography. There's 4 of them in the New Testament, these biographies of the life and ministry of Jesus. Here, John is recording one of them for us. And he tells us right here why. Because this is a sign. He doesn't use the word miracle. He uses the word sign. It is pointing to something that we today are supposed to notice, something that the people then would have noticed. So we're going to follow this. Maybe you notice there's kind of 3 basic movements, acts in this story. The man comes to Jesus. Jesus gives his response, and then the man goes and goes back home and encounters Jesus' action, right? And in those 3 things, we're going to see these 3 points. I'm giving the outline right at the top, guys. Ready? How faith emerges, what faith means, and where faith multiplies. How faith emerges, what faith means, what do we even mean by it, and where faith multiplies. First, how faith emerges. I don't think that this royal official left home that day in a hurry thinking, I'm going on a faith journey. Do you? I don't think so. I think he was a desperate father counting the minutes, racing as fast as he could. Capernaum to Cana, about 20 miles, maybe 6 to 8 hours on first century roads. He's making double time. Why? He's throwing a Hail Mary pass in the last seconds of the game. Maybe, just maybe, Jesus can save his son. It is front of mind. Everything else has fallen away, right? He's not thinking, I'm going on a faith journey. He's thinking, maybe my son can survive. And he makes his way to Jesus. Here we go. Let's read it again. Verse 46. Once more, Jesus visited Cana in Galilee, where he had turned water into wine. And there was a certain royal official whose son lay sick at Capernaum. When this man heard that Jesus had arrived in Galilee from Judea, he went to him and begged him to come heal his son, who was close to death. Unless you people see signs and wonders, Jesus told him, you will never believe. Now, can I say, I don't know if you notice this, if you feel this way when we read this passage. Can I just say Jesus' response is weird here? It feels weird to me. It feels a little bit harsh. It feels a little bit like changing the subject, right? Like his son is sick, he's dying. I think if you or I were there in this scene, and we're part of the crowd that's gathering around Jesus, right? And Jesus, instead of saying this to the man, if he turned to you or he turned to me and said, hey, what do you think I should do here? What would we say? Go! Right? You still might make it. The son might survive. You can heal him. And Jesus doesn't do any of that. Instead, he says, you people. He addresses the man and he speaks to the people. And he says, you people, unless you see signs and wonders, you will never believe. He's talking about seemingly something else, not even the request at hand, the acute crisis in front of him. Why? Why does Jesus respond this way? Jesus is identifying what so many of those people, those crowds around him, in the weeks prior to this, we know in John he had healings, multiple healings in the city of Jerusalem. That's probably where this royal official even heard about this. Maybe he witnessed one of the miracles. These other people running to Jesus asking for help. Now he's that person asking for help, right? We see all of these things, and what Jesus is identifying in these people, so many of them, is that they believed merely what they saw. The object of their faith was the spectacle itself. They weren't doing what Jesus intended. We're looking beyond the spectacle, the sign, to the maker of the spectacle and sign. They weren't asking, what's the source? What's the destination? What's going on here? And so you have these crowds kind of bouncing from spectacle to spectacle, getting their new dopamine hit on these new miracles from Jesus. And he identifies this, and he seizes this opportunity in this moment of crisis to address this thing. You see, for the people there, and maybe sometimes for me, for us, seeing was a kind of belief faucet. Turn it on, turn on seeing, belief flows, right? Turn off seeing, belief dries up. I can think about the kind of spectacles in my life that I jump from thing to thing, dopamine hits I can jump from, the bigger questions and desires that I have about career, about family, whatever, these kinds of things, when they're going well, belief flows. When they're not going well, I'm lost and I'm on to the next thing. That's what's happening here. The Father comes with a question about his Son. Now listen, what is Jesus doing? He's giving an answer about himself. The Father is pointing to his Son and saying, let's go. And Jesus is pointing to himself and saying, I'm here. He's shifting the whole conversation. He's seizing a moment. It's tough to hear when you're in the middle of crisis. Jesus doesn't use these words, but he's seizing a momentary affliction to talk about an eternal value. Jesus says, I'm here. He rightly sees a father in desperation. His child is sick. Imagine how sick this child must have been. How suddenly he must have come upon this illness. This is a royal official. He has all the means that he needs. And yet he's so sick, he hasn't been able to solve this problem in any other way. He's so sick, in fact, they can't, with their whole royal consort, can't bring the child to Jesus. He's too fragile. He wouldn't survive the 20 miles. Jesus sees this desperation, and he looks at the man, and he says, in essence, it's clear to me that you trust the miracle. Will you trust me? Do you see how he wants the signs to point to him? He doesn't want yet another person in the crowd just chasing the spectacle. For this man, crisis prepared the ground for faith to emerge. I wonder, for you, have you had moments of crisis, those darkest hours? Often, these can be spaces and times in our life when faith can begin to emerge. Not always, but often. C.S. Lewis, last week, Pastor Gabe mentioned him, a quote from C.S. Lewis about miracles. Do you remember that? Maybe you've read some of C.S. Lewis's books, maybe not. He was an Oxford scholar, one of the great intellects of the 20th century. He actually set out, Lewis did, to write a treatise disproving Christianity. And in the process, what happened? He was confronted with crisis. You see, as the further he studied, the more he studied, he realized the ground that he was standing on was far shakier than the ground he was learning about in Christianity. And that intellectual crisis produced an emerging faith, and C.S. Lewis became a Christian. Right? Crisis can produce ground where faith begins to emerge. There's lots of things that I could say about crisis. There's the crisis of identity crisis. So I can use myself for this one. There's a certain kind of identity crisis when you're confronted with the fact that you're not the person you style yourself to be. Do you know what I'm talking about? For me, when I looked back and I could see, oh my God, oh God, I'm hurting the people I purport to love the most. The values that I say I hold most dear, I compromise. This is a kind of identity crisis. And in that crisis, what happened for me? It was fertile ground where faith began to emerge. This is a common thing for lots of people who come to Christ. Or there's economic crises, underwater mortgage, a lost job. There's health crises like we're seeing right here with this man. And they're intensely perspective-giving, aren't they? Intensely focusing. I wonder, for this royal official, imagine just 1 week prior to this event, what was top of mind for him? Probably some bit of business, somebody to hire or fire, I don't know. What did they do in Roman times? I don't know. Right? But now, in the harsh probability of losing his son, all of that had fallen away. He was singularly focused in this moment of crisis. Crisis is not, it's important, it can create a space for faith to emerge, but it is not the most important. What is? Jesus in the midst of crisis. Jesus' presence. And Jesus puts himself in this man's life in a way that's far greater than merely snapping his fingers with a miracle. He challenges him, and he challenges the crowd. Jesus' presence in the midst of crisis is crucial for faith to emerge. His question, his challenge, his counsel, his comfort, his invitation. Do you see this all in this passage? We just read a few verses. It's so rich. For everyone, here's the truth. You could be one of those folks that grew up going to church. Your grandma went to church. Your great-grandma went to church. You're there all the time. Or this could be your first Sunday at church, your third Sunday at church. I don't know. For all of us, unless we're desperate, we will never come to Christian faith. Unless we're desperate, we will never come to Christian faith. Why? We must come to an end of ourselves before we understand and can receive the riches of God. Before we can truly encounter him, we must acknowledge our own limitations before we experience God's transcendence. And here we have, again, a royal official. He had it all together, and he came to an end of himself. There was nothing he could do. And in this desperate situation, again, faith had opportunity to emerge. How does faith emerge? Often in crisis, always at the invitation of Jesus. Often in crisis, always at the invitation of Jesus. Second, what faith means. How does the royal official respond to Jesus' challenge? Let's look again, verse 49. The royal official said, "Sir, come down before my child dies." "Go," Jesus replied. "Your son will live." The man took Jesus at his word and departed. Now, there's 2 times the official speaks. Did you notice that? The first time he says, "Come and heal my son, he may yet live." The second time, it's much simpler, more visceral. It's his last gasp. If you're a parent and you've had a child in danger, I mean, your brain every second, it is top of mind. It's such a visceral request. It's his plea. Earlier it uses the word begged. He begged Jesus, "Sir, come down before my child dies." It's almost like he's given to the fact maybe his child will die before he asked for healing. And now he's like, at least be around before he dies. And here we see what I think is the most basic of all prayers. Help. Have you ever had a dark hour? You're out of words, and you just say, "Help. Help me." If you have, you're in good company. There's a rich tradition of Christians that pray this prayer. In Psalm 70, verse 1, it goes like this: "Hasten, O God, to save me. Come quickly, Lord, to help me." I love this prayer. You know, all of us experience Christian faith in a little bit different way, and some things challenge us and some things really feed us. One of the things for me personally that really feeds me is just how frank the Bible is, how real it is. It's not like a commercial. You know, they're not selling me something, and you see the psalmist pray, "Help, God, and hurry up." Hasten. You know, have you ever had a prayer where you're like, it's not just help, but it's like, "Can you go faster, please?" It's real. Isn't it so real? That's the prayer. That's the plea, the begging of this father in front of Jesus. And here we see Jesus offer a clear instruction. Go, and a clear answer. Your son will live. And we have, incredibly, the man goes. He departs. What is faith? What does it mean, at least from a biblical perspective, from a Christian worldview? What is faith? We have all kinds of popular ideas about faith, right? Like kind of in the pop culture. You could say the writer of The Interview, interviewing the political candidate that I mentioned at the top, you know, by his question, what about those of us who don't practice faith? He's tipping his hand to what he thinks faith means. It means belonging to a particular religious group or tribe, right? A tradition. You know, we could say another understanding of faith goes something like doing or believing what doesn't make sense. In this understanding, the more outrageous the claim, perhaps the stronger the faith. There's another understanding of faith that is a kind of sentimentality. This is celebrities getting together and singing Imagine by John Lennon. This is singing loud for all to hear to power Santa's sleigh, that kind of a thing. There's like this sentimental view of faith. I like Elf too. It's okay. Sometimes faith is thought of as a kind of a mystical experience. If I go on the right retreat, or I get in the wilderness or on the mountains, on the mountaintop, maybe I can acquire some faith, some mystical experience, right? Each of these things, and there are others, each of these might offer a certain kind of value, but all of them fall short of what Jesus is identifying as belief, as faith. According to Jesus, faith is not belonging to a religious tradition. Faith is not abandoning reason. Faith is not sentimentality, and faith is not mystical experience. So what is it? What is it? Do you see it in the passage? I think, for me personally, the Bible talks a lot about faith, but for me personally, in this passage, we have the most succinct, potent definition of faith. Faith means taking Jesus at his word. Jesus says, "Go, your son will live." And what does it say? Then the man took Jesus at his word and departed. What a powerful demonstration of faith. What does it mean? Trusting his word. What did the man do when he saw no miracle? He listened to the word. What do I do when I cannot identify Jesus in a situation? I turn to his word. Taking Jesus at his word. This is what faith is. It has substance. It's not loose and ephemeral. It means something real. I can turn to something tangible. A real person who gives real words and real instructions, who preserves them for us. And what do I do when I can't see what I need to see or want to see? I look at his word. The answer is in his word. Trust, obey, believe. In Christian vernacular, trust, belief, faith, obedience, these are all synonyms. They're all synonyms. They're all part of the same fabric. They all flow from hearing Jesus' words. Taking Jesus at his word means saying, I want Jesus no matter what else. Taking Jesus at his word means it means wanting him more than a particular outcome. It doesn't mean not wanting outcomes. It means ordering those things rightly. I want him more than a particular outcome. That's what taking Jesus at his word means. It means whatever you tell me, I will do. This is what we see in Jesus' offer to the man, and it's what we see in the man's response to Jesus. So first, how does faith emerge? Often in crisis, always at the invitation of Jesus. Second, what does faith mean? What does it mean? You can answer. I know I'm new. Do you remember? Take Jesus at his word. And finally, here we are, where faith multiplies. Verse 51, let's look at it again. While he, the official, was still on his way, his servants met him with the news that his boy was living. And when he inquired as to the time when his son got better, they said to him, yesterday at 1 p.m, the fever left him. Then the father realized that this was the exact time at which Jesus had said to him, your son will live. So he and his whole household believed. Sometime into this journey, the man's returning home. He has this strange instruction. I gotta think. Sometime into the journey, he starts second guessing. Wait a second, should I have stayed longer? Should I have insisted? Should I have just picked up Jesus with my royal entourage and carried him to Capernaum? Should I have done something more? You gotta figure doubts are creeping in, right? Sometime into this journey, some other parts of his staff, they intercept him and they say, your son is living. It sounds strange to our ears, your son is living. It sounds like, okay, it sounds too small. He's just living. Well, he was living before. Another translation, you could say, your son is full of life. something has happened so radically that the royal household has sent out a second entourage to intercept the father and bring him back to say, never mind. The turnaround must have been so great that they forget the plan about bringing Jesus here, right? Do you understand? It's like, I imagine the mother is at the bedside. She's been there all night. She's exhausted from a sleepless night, from a worry-filled night. And she's trying to bring the fever down with cold towels. And she leaves the room to put the towels in water again. And there, suddenly at her side, is a little boy peering into the basin with her. What's up, Mom? What are you doing? What's with the towels? It must have been something like that. He must have been bouncing off the walls, full of energy, full of life, because they send out this second escort, the second cohort of people to bring the father back. And when he hears the news, what must the father's response? Imagine. He probably laughed out loud. His laughter probably turned to tears and then back to laughter again. And then he starts looking around. He starts connecting the dots, right? He's doing the mental math in his head. A parent, like I said, if their kid is in danger, every second is front of mind. He's doing the mental math. He's like, wait a second. I left at a certain time. I'm here. They left at a certain time. That means, wait, what time did you say he was full of life? And he realizes all at once, it was precisely the moment when Jesus said, your son will live. What a beautiful, incredible story. What does the man do in this moment? What do we know about what the outcome is? He tells his household. Do you remember when we were first, last week, Pastor Gabe asked the question, what is John, the author of this book that we're studying, what is he trying to do? He gives us the answer. We read this verse last week. Let's look at it again. John chapter 20, verse 30. It says, Jesus performed many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not recorded in this book. But these are written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. Now, here's what's going on. John had walked with Jesus. He was a disciple of Jesus. He had witnessed these miracles. He had heard Jesus' teaching, and it was so good. He had to get it into as many hands as possible. He wanted other people to have the same experience that he had, right? That's exactly what happens with the royal official. He encounters Jesus. He's challenged by Jesus in a way that he didn't expect. He receives word from Jesus. He obeys that word, and it is so good, he's got to tell everybody around him. He must have told the story so much and so incessantly and with such verve that everybody, it says his whole household became believers. And this word household at the time, first century, this would have meant not just his immediate family. This is like all the people under his employ, kind of his circle of influence. There is this story just racing through this household. And people saw the boy then, and they see the boy now, and they hear his story, and they believe. How does faith emerge? At the invitation of Jesus. What does faith mean? It means taking Jesus at his word. Where does faith multiply? In and through people who take Jesus at his word. In and through people who take Jesus at his word. What a powerful sign, using the word like John does, pointing to something far greater than merely a healing. We're dealing with the God of the universe. A healing is merely giving an entire household an entirely new life and worldview. That's what Jesus is about. He's saying, look to me. Recall the interviewer who asked, what about those of us, those like me, without faith, who don't practice faith, who don't believe? You know, in Jesus would say, that doesn't exist. Everybody trusts something. Under 100% of your decisions, there is some belief about something. Some belief about what makes the good life, about what you really want or desire, right? Everybody has faith in something. Jesus is simply trying to turn our attention to the source of every good, perfect thing. He's saying, don't just trust the created things, trust the Creator. He's turning our attention. So I wonder, if you are new to faith, if you don't know what you think about Christian faith, or if you've been walking with Jesus for a long time, what do you do next? What do you do with this story? I have one idea. Do the same thing the man did, the royal official did. Go to Jesus and say, help. Will you help me, Lord? Will you help me with the decisions I have in front of me? Will you help me with this family problem I can't figure out? Will you help me just even know if I'm really talking to anything at all, or if this is just something I heard at New City Church? Trust him. Trust him. Just do the thing the man did. And then take his word that we have and put it into practice. See what happens. What have you got to lose? You've got everything to gain. Jesus invites us to place our faith in him. He challenges us to exchange superficiality for reality. He identifies our tendency to bounce from one thing to the next, and he offers deep anchor and safe harbor. Jesus hears our pleas. He hears your pleas for help, and he answers them in the most radical way imaginable, with himself. Can I pray for us? Jesus, I love you. I thank you so much for preserving these stories for us, for using John the way you used him, for seeing to it that this was passed down for us today, that we might hear it. And I pray for each person in this room who you know perfectly, and you know exactly where they're at, whether they're in a crisis time or a good time, you know. Lord, would you do your work in their hearts? Would you, just like you did here, would you point to yourself in ways that are understandable, in ways that we receive? Help, we pray. In Jesus' name, amen.